It's day 2 of the G20 Leaders Summit in Hamburg, Germany. It's a debut stage for South Korean President Moon Jae-in. He's carrying on a busy day with a series of back-to-back bilaterals, as well as taking part in group discussions. Our Chief Blue House correspondent Moon Jae-in files this report from Hamburg.
It's day 2 of the G20 Leaders Summit here in Hamburg, and the delegations here for the annual meeting of the highest level are already well underway with the morning session of the second day of the summit. South Korean President Moon Jae-in kicked off the morning with a series of one-on-ones. Now, let me remind you, this is the newly elected leader's debut on the global stage, and he wants to take this opportunity to break the ice with as many world leaders as possible. The morning bilateral of the day began with Indian Prime Minister Narenda Modi at the Messehallen Convention Center, the venue of the G20 this year. The 20-minute-long meeting was followed by President Moon's meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron and Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, each roughly 20 minutes long. Now, just hours ago, we've learned that President Moon will also sit down with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and President of the European Council, Donald Tusk. The South Korean leader had to squeeze these two in his already packed itinerary upon the two leaders' requests last minute. Now, Group Session 3 of the G20 Leaders Summit is underway as we speak. Topics taking center stage are health, on the leaders' recognition of dangerous pathogens increasingly becoming a global problem. Now, President Moon was expected to deliver a 3-minute-long speech on the topic, during which he was to seek the global leaders' attention and support in the health and poverty situation among children in North Korea. Africa was another area to be discussed during this working session. The session will also touch upon refugees, poverty, as well as global efforts to improve women's economic empowerment. The G20 thus agreed on the goal of improving labor force participation among women and reducing the gap that still exists in this respect between men and women by 25% by year 2025. The South Korean leader will take an active role here as well, introducing his government's women's participation agenda and pledging more support in the G20 initiative by the Republic of Korea. Now, following the G20 retreat session yesterday on the first day of the G20 summit, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, the host of this year, gave a press conference during which she explicitly spelled out the leaders' collective concern over North Korea's latest violation of the UN Security Council. It now remains to be seen whether the issue of North Korea will be included in the G20 joint communique released at the conclusion of the summit, and to which level the leaders will collectively condemn North Korea. Moon Jae-in, Arirang News, Hamburg.